The broken teacher and the quiet stranger. The afternoon light streamed through the tall windows of Riverside Community Center, casting geometric shadows across the worn wooden floors. Natalie Carter stood at the front of the art studio, her dark curls pulled back with a paint-splattered bandana, watching as her adult students tentatively approached their blank canvases. Teaching art to the community had become her sanctuary. After what happened with Brandon, the engagement that ended 3 weeks before the wedding when she discovered his double life, Natalie had retreated into the one thing that never lied to her: color, texture, and the honest language of creation. "Remember," she said softly, walking between the easels, "there are no mistakes in art, only discoveries." That's when she noticed him. A man in his early 30s standing in the doorway, hands tucked into the pockets of his canvas jacket. He had dark hair that fell slightly over his forehead and eyes that seemed to notice everything while demanding nothing. "Are you here for the workshop?" Natalie asked, approaching him. He nodded, offering a small smile. "If it's not too late to join, I'm Owen Hayes." "Natalie. And you're right on time." She gestured toward an empty easel near the window. "Grab an apron from the hook. We're working with watercolors today." Owen moved with quiet efficiency, setting up his workspace without fuss. While other students chatted nervously about their lack of experience, he simply began mixing colors on his palette, testing different shades of blue against the paper. Throughout the session, Natalie found her attention drifting toward him. Not because he was particularly skilled, his technique was actually quite rough, but because of the way he approached each brush stroke, thoughtful, patient, as if he was listening to the painting rather than forcing it to obey. When the workshop ended, most students rushed out, but Owen stayed behind, helping to clean brushes without being asked. "You don't have to do that," Natalie said, surprised. "I know." He rinsed another brush carefully. "But you've been teaching for 2 hours straight. Figured you could use a hand." Something about his matter-of-fact kindness made her chest tighten. It reminded her of a time when she believed people could be genuinely good without wanting something in return. "Thank you," she said quietly. "That's really kind." He shrugged. Kindness should be the default, not the exception. Over the following weeks, Owen became a regular at her workshops. He arrived early, stayed late, and never complained about the mediocrity of his own work. Instead, he seemed genuinely interested in learning, asking thoughtful questions about color theory and composition. But it was the small things Natalie noticed most. When elderly Mrs. Patterson struggled to reach the top shelf for canvas boards, Owen had already moved them to a lower, more accessible location before the next class. When teenage student Jordan mentioned he couldn't afford proper brushes, a brand new set appeared in his locker at the community center. No note, no name attached. "Did you leave those brushes for Jordan?" Natalie asked Owen one evening as they walked toward the parking lot. Owen's expression remained neutral. "Why would you think it was me?" "Because you're the only person I know who gives without needing credit." He stopped walking and looked at her directly. Maybe Jordan just needed someone to believe in his talent. Anonymous gifts are easier to accept than charity. The way he said it made Natalie wonder what he knew about pride and accepting help. Everything about Owen seemed deliberately understated. His worn jacket, his old pickup truck, his reluctance to talk about himself. "What do you do, Owen?" she asked one rainy evening as they shared coffee in the center's small kitchen after class. "For work, I mean." He stirred his coffee slowly, a small smile playing at his lips. "I work in development, community projects, funding initiatives, mostly behind the scenes." "That's admirably vague." "Is it?" He met her eyes with gentle humor. "I could bore you with the details, but I'd rather hear about why you teach. You're clearly talented enough to do gallery work." Natalie felt the familiar tightness in her chest. "I did gallery work. I had a whole different life planned, actually. It just didn't work out the way I thought." Owen didn't press, didn't pry. He simply nodded and said, "Sometimes the life we don't plan turns out to be the one we actually needed." His wisdom caught her off guard. There was something about Owen that felt both young and old. as if he'd lived more than his years should allow. One particularly cold November evening, Natalie's car refused to start. She stood in the parking lot, frustrated tears threatening, as she called roadside assistance, only to be told it would be a 2-hour wait. "Let me give you a ride," Owen said, appearing beside her truck. "I can't ask you to do that." "You didn't ask," I offered. His tone was gentle but firm. "Where do you live?" The drive to her small apartment above the bookstore took 20 minutes. Owen drove carefully, asked no intrusive questions, and when they arrived, he walked her to her door despite the cold. "Thank you," Natalie said, fumbling with her keys. "Really? You didn't have to, Natalie." He said her name like it meant something. When someone extends kindness to you, you don't have to keep thanking them. You just accept it and maybe pass it forward someday. She watched him walk back to his truck, something warm and confusing blooming in her chest. The next morning, she found her car in the parking lot of the community center, fully repaired, with a simple note on the windshield. "Alternator was shot. Fixed now. Stay warm. A friend." She knew immediately who the friend was. When she confronted Owen at the next workshop, he simply smiled and said, "Can't prove it was me." "Owen, besides," he interrupted gently, "you needed your car. I was in a position to help. That's not charity, Natalie. That's just what people should do for each other." Over the months, their friendship deepened. They shared lunches in the park, attended local art exhibitions, and had long conversations about everything except the one thing Natalie couldn't quite figure out: who Owen really was beneath the humble exterior. Then came the day everything changed. Natalie was at home, curled up with her cat Whiskers, half watching a news special about local philanthropy. She wasn't paying much attention until a familiar voice made her look up sharply. There, on her television screen, stood Owen. But this Owen wore an impeccably tailored suit and stood at a podium with a banner behind him that read, "Hayes Community Development Foundation, building futures, changing lives." The news anchor's voice cut through her shock. CEO Owen Hayes announced today a $25 million initiative to fund arts education in underserved communities across the state. The camera zoomed in as Owen spoke with the same quiet authority she recognized, but now in a completely different context. "Every child deserves access to creativity. Art isn't a luxury, it's a fundamental human need." Natalie's hands went numb. Her phone buzzed with a text from her colleague at the center. "Did you see this? Your workshop student is Owen Hayes, the Owen Hayes. His foundation is funding our entire program next year." She couldn't breathe. All this time, she'd been falling for a man she thought understood struggle, modesty, and authentic living. But he'd been lying to her, not with words, but with silence. Everything she'd begun to trust shattered in an instant, leaving her sitting alone in her apartment, staring at a screen that showed her just how little she really knew about the man who'd quietly stolen her heart. Truth, trust, and transformation. Natalie didn't sleep that night. She sat at her kitchen table, Whiskers purring obliviously in her lap, replaying every conversation, every moment, every carefully worded deflection. Owen had never technically lied. He'd just never told her the whole truth, and that somehow felt worse. By morning, she'd made her decision. She sent a brief professional text. "I think it's best if we take some space. I need time to think." His response came within minutes. "I understand. I'm sorry, Natalie, for everything." She deleted the message thread immediately, but not before noticing he'd sent 17 other messages overnight that she hadn't opened. She deleted those too. At the community center that Tuesday, whispers followed her everywhere. Students asked if she'd known, if they'd been dating, if the rumors were true that the entire art program was being renovated thanks to the Hayes Foundation. "Miss Carter," Jordan caught her arm after class, eyes bright with excitement. "Did you?" "Here, we're getting a whole new wing. Professional-grade equipment, visiting artist programs, scholarships. It's insane." Natalie forced a smile. "That's wonderful, Jordan. You deserve it." What she didn't say was that every new paintbrush, every renovated studio space, every scholarship would now remind her of the man who'd made her believe in trust. Again, only to reveal he'd been withholding the most fundamental truth about himself. The letter arrived on Friday. It wasn't delivered by courier or messenger. Instead, she found it tucked inside her mailbox at the community center, handwritten on simple lined paper, her name written in Owen's distinctive, careful script. She almost threw it away. Almost. But late that night, alone in her apartment with Tiu, rain pattering against the windows, she finally unfolded it. Dear Natalie, I've started this letter more times than I can count. Every version sounds like an excuse, and you deserve more than excuses. You deserve the truth I should have given you from the beginning. 5 years ago, I was engaged to a woman named Victoria. We'd been together since college, built plans, dreamed dreams. Then my father died unexpectedly, and I inherited his foundation along with responsibilities I wasn't prepared for. Suddenly, I wasn't just Owen anymore. I was Owen Hayes, CEO, heir, public figure. Victoria changed overnight. Suddenly, our small apartment wasn't good enough. Our quiet life wasn't ambitious enough. She wanted galas and society pages and a version of me that I didn't recognize. When I told her I wanted to keep living simply, focusing on the actual work rather than the image, she left. She said I was wasting my potential by choosing purpose over prestige. That betrayal taught me to hide. Not just my name or my position, but the parts of myself that the wrong people might love for the wrong reasons. Then I walked into your art class. You were teaching Mrs. Patterson how to blend colors, and you had paint in your hair, and you spoke about creativity like it was oxygen. You saw me, just me, without any context or expectations. For the first time in years, someone's kindness toward me wasn't calculated. I told myself I'd tell you eventually. But every day that passed, I became more terrified. Terrified that knowing would change everything. That you'd either treat me differently or, worse, assume everything I'd done for you was manipulation. The car repair, the supplies, the quiet moments. None of that was strategy, Natalie. It was just me, trying to be good to someone who'd reminded me why goodness mattered. I never meant to deceive you. I just wanted to be loved as Owen, not as Owen Hayes. I wanted to know if someone could care about the man who feeds stray cats and can't draw straight lines, not the CEO who writes checks. But I see now that by protecting myself I hurt you, and that's unforgivable. If you never want to see me again, I'll understand completely. But if there's any part of you that remembers the man in the paint-stained apron who couldn't blend colors to save his life, if that version of me earned any fragment of your trust, I'll be at the studio Sunday morning at 8. Not as a CEO, not as anyone important, just as Owen, hoping for a chance to prove that who I was with you was the most honest version of myself I've ever been. With more regret and hope than I can express, Owen Natalie read the letter 3 times. Then she pressed it against her chest and cried, not from anger, but from the weight of recognition. She understood what it meant to be betrayed by someone who wanted you for what you represented rather than who you were. Brandon had loved her potential, the successful gallery owner she might become, the connections her family might provide. He'd never loved Natalie, the woman who preferred small community workshops to prestigious exhibitions. Owen had been protecting himself from the same wound she carried. Sunday morning arrived cold and clear. Natalie woke at dawn, argued with herself for an hour, then finally pulled on her favorite paint-stained sweater and drove to the community center. She arrived at 8:15, deliberately late, her heart hammering. The studio door was unlocked. Inside, Owen sat at the same easel he'd used that first day, attempting to paint a sunrise. He'd clearly been there for hours. Multiple crumpled papers surrounded his feet, evidence of failed attempts. He looked up when she entered, and the vulnerability in his expression nearly broke her. "You came," he said simply. "I almost didn't." Natalie set her bag down but didn't approach. "I spent 2 days being angry, then I spent 2 days being sad. Then I read your letter again." Owen stood slowly, hands at his sides. "I don't blame you for any of those feelings. I need to ask you something, and I need complete honesty." Her voice was steady despite the tremor in her hands. "Did you target me? Did you research me before that first class?" "No." His answer was immediate and firm. "I was driving past one day, saw the sign for community art classes, and walked in on impulse. I had no idea who you were. I didn't know your last name until the third session. And when did you realize you had feelings? A small, sad smile crossed his face. When you laughed at my terrible attempt to paint a dog that looked more like a deformed potato. You laughed so genuinely, without any meanness in it. I realized I couldn't remember the last time someone had laughed with me, not at something I'd said or done to impress them, but just naturally. Natalie felt her carefully constructed walls beginning to crack. You fixed my car. You needed your car. You bought Jordan brushes. He has talent. He needed tools. You donated $25 million to fund arts programs. Owen's expression grew serious. That wasn't about you, Natalie. That was about hundreds of kids who deserve what you give them: belief, opportunity, a chance to discover themselves through creativity. I would have done that whether we'd ever met or not. It's literally my job, the job my father left me to do right. She studied him for a long moment. Why Sunday at 8? Why here? Because this is where we met honestly, before titles or complications. I wanted to show you I'd still show up as that version of myself, the one who genuinely can't paint but keeps trying anyway. Despite everything, Natalie felt a smile tugging at her lips. Your sunrise looks like a crime scene. Owen glanced back at his canvas and laughed, a real, genuine laugh that reminded her of all the Tuesday evenings they'd spent together. See? This is why I need you. Brutal honesty wrapped in humor. Owen. She took a step closer. I can't go through this again. I can't fall for someone who keeps parts of themselves locked away. If we do this, if we even try, I need all of you. The man in the worn jacket and the CEO in the suit. The guy who feeds stray cats and the man who funds entire programs. All of it. You'll have all of it, he promised, his voice thick with emotion. No more hiding, no more deflecting. I'll answer any question, introduce you to any part of my life, bore you with foundation board meetings if you want. I'm serious, Owen. Complete transparency. That means meeting your colleagues, understanding your responsibilities, being part of your actual life, not some compartmentalized version of it. Done. He took a careful step toward her. Anything else? She pretended to consider. You have to keep taking my art classes. You're still terrible, and you need the practice. That's fair. And you have to tell me when your world gets overwhelming. No more protecting me from complexity. If I'm in, I'm all in. But that means trusting me with the hard parts too. I can do that. He was close enough now that she could see the hope warring with uncertainty in his eyes. Anything else? Natalie reached out and took his hand, noting how it trembled slightly in hers. Just one more thing. Name it. Kiss me like you're not afraid I'll disappear. Owen didn't hesitate. He pulled her close, one hand cupping her face with infinite gentleness, and kissed her like she was both the question and the answer he'd been searching for. It wasn't perfect or polished. It was real and slightly desperate and completely honest. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing unevenly, Natalie rested her forehead against his. We're going to have to figure this out as we go, she whispered. I'm good at figuring things out, Owen replied, especially with the right partner. Even if that partner thinks your watercolor technique is criminally bad, especially then. They spent the rest of that Sunday morning in the studio, not painting, but talking. Owen told her about his father's unexpected death, the weight of suddenly being responsible for a foundation worth hundreds of millions, the loneliness of never knowing if people wanted him or his resources. Natalie shared her own story, Brandon's betrayal, the wedding that never happened, the way she'd rebuilt herself through teaching. We're both pretty broken, aren't we? Natalie said at one point, leaning against Owen's shoulder. Maybe, Owen agreed. Or maybe we're both just healing, and maybe that's the same thing. 1 year later, the new community arts center gleamed in the afternoon sun, its grand opening drawing a crowd of students, families, and local officials. Natalie stood near the entrance, watching Jordan cut the ribbon on the new youth scholarship program, his hands shaking with pride. Owen stood beside her, dressed simply in jeans and a button-down shirt, deliberately avoiding the spotlight. The mayor had tried 3 times to get him to make a speech, but he'd politely declined. insisting this day belonged to the students and teachers. "You know everyone knows who funded this, right?" Natalie murmured, squeezing his hand. "Knowing and being forced to listen to me talk about it are two different things," Owen replied with a smile. "Besides, I'm just here to support my favorite teacher." "Favorite, huh? Don't let it go to your head." After the ceremony, they walked through the new studios, admiring the professional-grade equipment, the natural lighting, the spaces designed specifically for creativity to flourish. In one room, a group of children were already at work, their paintings chaotic and joyful and completely uninhibited. "This is what matters," Owen said quietly, watching them work. "Not the plaques or the press releases, this right here." Natalie leaned into him, feeling the solid warmth of his presence. "You know what I love about you? My devastating good looks and impeccable painting skills," she laughed. "That you still show up to my workshops every Tuesday night, even though you're terrible at art and have foundation board meetings at 7 a.m. Those workshops are the best part of my week," Owen said, and she knew he meant it. That evening, they sat on the small balcony of Natalie's apartment, which Owen had slowly been moving into over the past 6 months, one box of belongings at a time. Whiskers purred on Owen's lap while they shared takeout and watched the sun set over the city. "I have something for you," Owen said, reaching into his jacket pocket. Natalie's heart jumped, but he pulled out a small wrapped package, not a ring box. Inside was a delicate silver bracelet with a single charm, a tiny paintbrush. "To remind you," Owen said softly, fastening it around her wrist, "that you changed my life the day you handed me an apron and told me there were no mistakes in art, only discoveries." Natalie felt tears prick her eyes. "Owen Hayes, are you getting sentimental on me?" "Completely." "Is it working?" "Devastatingly." He kissed her temple, then her cheek, then finally her lips. When they pulled apart, Natalie studied the bracelet, the way it caught the fading light. "I love you," she said simply. "The CEO and the terrible artist, the philanthropist and the man who feeds stray cats. All of it." "I love you too," Owen replied. "The gifted teacher and the woman who sees the best in people. The survivor and the believer. Every part." They sat in comfortable silence as stars began appearing in the darkening sky. Somewhere in the city below, students were discovering their talents, families were finding hope, and communities were being transformed. All because one man had learned to lead with quiet purpose, and one woman had taught him that true connection required complete honesty. It wasn't a fairy tale. It was better. It was real. And in the end, that made all the difference. As the crowd cheered and the golden sunlight spilled over the new community art center, Natalie looked at Owen, the man who had once been her mistake, and now her miracle. Sometimes love doesn't begin with perfection. It begins with forgiveness. If you believe second chances can create new beginnings, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to Every Verse Stories.